And hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining the Embodied Cognitive Science Seminar Series. Today, we are happy to welcome Joel Krueger. Joel Krueger is an associate professor in philosophy at the University of Exeter, England. He works primarily in the fields of phenomenology, philosophy of mind, and philosophy of cognitive science, specifically issues in the 4E cognition, including emotions, social cognition, and psychopathology. Today, Professor Krueger will be talking about grief, specifically recent online technologies for grieving practices and their potential role in the society. Professor Krueger, thank you very much for joining us today. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. It's really a delight to be here. I'm looking forward to seeing you in person soon. Really excited. So I have to acknowledge Mark. I see Mark in the back of a car. It looks like maybe a taxi. Every time I see Mark online, he's in some exotic location, either on the move or last time it was in the dark. I think it was very late at night. So I think Mark wins the award for having the most exotic and interesting backgrounds every time I see him. But anyways, hope you're doing better, Mark. So really great to be here. The title of the talk is Communing with the Dead Online. And it's Chatbots, Grief, and Continuing Bonds. I think that's the title. Sorry, Lucy, if I got that wrong. There's Lucy. She's also joined us. This is some work that we've done together, and it's forthcoming in a special issue of Journal of Consciousness Studies on grief. This is part of this wonderful project on grief that Matthew Ratcliffe, Louise Richardson, I think Becky Miller is also co-editing this special issue. This is a project on grief at York University. That's really wonderful. And so we were very delighted to be asked to be part of this, this project. So let me start with a poem. I like poetry. Sometimes I like to start my philosophy talks with a bit of poetry. I think this is a nice poetry, both in that it captures, well, the character of grief, something about the phenomenology of grief and maintaining continuing bonds with the dead, but it also shows the importance of latching onto and establishing material environments and latching onto objects and things to help us maintain continuing bonds with the dead. So this is a poem by Tony Harrison called Long Distance 2. Though my mother was already 2 years dead, Dad kept her slippers warming by the gas, put hot water bottles her side of the bed, and still went to renew her transport pass. You couldn't just drop in, you had to phone. It put you off an hour to give him time to clear away her things and look alone, as though his still raw love were such a crime. You couldn't risk my blight of disbelief, though sure that very soon he'd hear her key scrape in the rusted lock and end his grief. He knew she'd just popped out to get the tea. I believe life ends with death, and that is all. You haven't both gone shopping just the same. In my new black leather phone book, there's your name and the disconnected number I still call. There's a lot of things I like about that poem, but I think it ends on a theme that's very relevant for the discussion today. The role that not just technology, that not just material objects play, but that technology and communication technologies can play in maintaining continuing bonds with the dead. So with that little bit of poetic context, let me just introduce today's question. I want to consider the following questions. This is what Lucy and I consider in our piece. What role might emerging digital technologies like chatbots play in our grieving practices? And then secondly, should we be worried about them? What are some of the concerns or objections that we might have to using chatbots to grieve? So four parts to the talk. Final thoughts doesn't really count. It's one slide of hand-wavy thoughts. A bit of background first. I want to introduce then the role of chatbots in grief. Part 3, I want to consider some objections that Lucy and I talk about in the paper. And then, as I said, final slide, part 4, just some final hand-wavy thoughts to sum it all up. So a little bit of background first. I think we can start by observing that grief is and has always been supported by a rich array of different forms of technology, from photographs to statues, shrines, tombs, memorials. You can see some practices there of individuals creating a death mask of a deceased person. That's James Joyce's death mask, second from the left. There was a Victorian tradition of taking photographs with the recently deceased. That's on the far left, which of course now might strike us as a little bit creepy and strange, but at the time that was a very cutting edge technology that was used to maintain a connection with the dead. And then more traditional technologies like shrines and temples, this sort of thing. Grave sites, of course. And I think one observation we can make when we look at sort of the evolving practices of our grief is that as our technologies evolve, so do our grieving practices. And much of our contemporary grief work is now shifted online. Modern technologies allow for the preservation of our digital remains in some very rich ways. And when we use someone, we can do a number of different things online to stay connected with them. We can read over chat threads, email exchanges. We can scroll through social media posts, photos, videos, blogs, podcasts, and many more examples we could name. The point is there now exists more accessible and a greater quantity and variety of artifacts for grief work than ever before, including digital artifacts. So that's what we're concerned with in this paper. And as these artifacts develop and grow, we find that more interactive ways of encountering and engaging with the dead are continually being designed, beyond just looking at a photograph, listening to an old voicemail, or going to see their gravesite. So there's a very famous example from Black Mirror, a science fiction TV series from some years ago that some of you are probably familiar with. A very famous episode called, I've already forgotten, Be Right Back. I think that's it. Yeah, anyways. So in this episode, Martha loses her partner, Ash, unexpectedly. And sometime later, after he dies, she's contacted by this mysterious technology company who says that they can essentially recreate him. First via a chatbot that replicates his texting style, so she starts texting with Ash. And then later, this technology evolves to her actually living with a robot replica of him. And again, this strikes us as a piece of science fiction. It's a great episode, even though I think I may have got the title wrong. It's a wonderful episode if you haven't seen it. Very relevant to some themes we're talking about today. And when it first aired, it probably was just old enough, back 2013, 14, something like that, that it still seemed relatively far away kind of technology. But that's not the case anymore. This technology is now here. Oh, Lucy just confirmed I got the title right. Thank you. All right. Oh, so now I have somehow blanked my screen. There we go. So chatbots are a thing that are actually happening. They're here now, and they've been here for a while. So in 2015, after the Russian tech entrepreneur Roman Mazurenko's death, his friend Eugenia Krueger, we'll come back to this case later, built a chatbot based upon hundreds of thousands of texts they'd exchange over Telegram, email communication, blog posts, social media posts, training the bot to reply to instant messages in Roman's voice. And again, we'll come back to this example in a little bit. A year after that, James Vlahos built a chatbot called DadBot, which I love, that was based on transcripts, interviews he'd had with his father, who had cancer and died relatively quickly. And so he spent this time creating this DadBot based upon these conversations that he had with his dad. And then even more recently, Microsoft was granted a patent. Technology companies have smelled an opportunity here. So Microsoft was granted a patent for a method of creating specific conversational chatbots that were modeled to sound like individual people, such as a friend, a relative, an acquaintance, a celebrity, a fictional character, a historical figure, this sort of thing. So the point, very simply, is that this technology is not going anywhere. It's only becoming more sophisticated and increasing in its complexity as it develops. And these new ways of connecting with the dead and communing with them online, grieving with their digital remains, will continue to develop and proliferate. Okay, so that's a bit of background. Let me now clarify what I'm talking about when I talk about grief. This paper was developed in the context of this grief project at York. And so there's been a lot of really great work coming out of this project on looking at different phenomenological aspects of grief. So we can start by saying that grief is an emotional response, the loss of someone who matters to us, of someone significant for us and for our lives. But of course, it's often much more than this. It's a much richer experience phenomenologically. Recent phenomenological work has explored various experiential dimensions of grief, including disturbances of the self-world relation. So again, a lot of the work coming out of not just the York group, but some other quarters as well, looks at various aspects of, or various dimensions of the way that the self's relationship with its world becomes disturbed or decentered in the experience of grief. So Thomas Fuchs has done really nice work on the presence and absence experience, the sense that everything that the individual sees, the individual who's lost somebody kind of bears traces of the person they've lost, and these objects and things around them are kind of bear the presence of the person, and so the deceased person is both present in the material environment via their absence. Matthew Ratcliffe and colleagues have done good work on the social regulative connections, interpersonal connections with others that are often disturbed in grief. Our sense of time, our sense of being bodily connected to the person we've lost, this loss of a shared habitual world we once inhabited with the person we've lost. All of these different dimensions are worthy of rich and careful treatment. Grief is more than just an emotional response to the loss of someone who matters to us. That's the point here. And setting aside the particulars of this good work, I think one of the many contributions this project and recent work on grief has made is to remind us that grief is not a passive experience. It's something that merely happens to us. It's something we do. It's something we enact. We play an active role in shaping the character, the content, and the temporal duration of our grief. And one of the ways we do this is to incorporate material culture. We use rituals, practices, resources, and relationships to work through and with our grief. And to grieve, then, is to actively explore ways of coming to terms with our emotional response to the loss of someone who matters to us, and to situate this loss in the broader context of our remaining relationships and commitments. So within the grief literature, there's been a shift in the last few decades about how psychologists, therapists, clinicians, and others think what we ought to do with our grief. And there's now growing consensus within clinical psychology that urging the bereaved to simply let go and move on is no longer the best practice when it comes to managing grief. So there was a long tradition, often attributed to Freud, that saw the proper course of grief as being one in which the individual severs all ties and relationships and emotional connections to the person they've lost. They acknowledge that the dead person is gone, and they simply move on with their lives. And of course, that's unrealistic. Any of us who've lost somebody, whether it's a parent, a friend, partner, grandparent, know that that's impossible psychologically to do. And it's now recognized that their enduring relationships with the dead can be healthy. We find new ways of bringing them into the present, incorporating them into our lives in new and creative manners. And finding this way to maintain a continuing bond can have a therapeutic value in terms of emotionally coping with our loss, providing us with the resources and resilience to move on. And technologies can play an important role as part of a broader repertoire of grieving rituals. They can help us, in other words, maintain continuing bonds with the dead, which means a sense of tangible connection that furnish new ways of relating to the dead, new ways of reintegrating with the world of the living while maintaining these connections with the dead. So let me turn to chatbots and grief work. So what role might chatbots play in all of this? Again, the point is that this technology exists. This is not something that's future science fiction fantasy. It already exists, and it's going to become more widespread as it becomes a more prevalent and accepted emerging transitional object of grief, as Goldstein and colleagues refer to it. And we should therefore take the time to think more carefully about how we could, and potentially should use these technologies. So from the perspective of the continuing bonds framework that we're working in this paper, healthy grief work is not about, again, an emotional disengagement or consigning the dead to the past. This continuing bonds framework says that healthy grieving becomes an ongoing process that involves negotiating the meaning of our loss, which includes finding ways to bring the dead with us into the future. So really the core of the argument in the paper that I'm talking about here today, I'm just going to kind of sketch an overview of it, is that chatbots can have a therapeutic and a practical emotional value, helping us to reconstruct and maintain what we call habits of intimacy that help us construct a continuing bond with the dead. There are at least 3 dimensions to these habits of intimacy that Lucy and I talk about: conversational practices, emotion regulation, and inhabiting shared time. So again, I'm just going to quickly sketch an overview of each of these 3 dimensions and the role that chatbots might play in helping us construct these habits of intimacy. So the first thing we can observe here is that habits of intimacy, as we use this term, with trusted others, with people who are valuable and important to us, that we have an intimate connection with, can experientially expand or contract our world and the sense of possibilities we feel within our world. So here's a nice quote from the philosopher Eugene Gendland, where he describes the phenomenology of this experience, the way that being with a trusted other can open up a vista or landscape of new possibilities, or conversely can close down or contract our sense of what is possible, what the world affords us. So here's a nice quote. He says that we all know people with whom it is best not to share anything that matters to us. If we have experienced something exciting, and if we tell it to those people, it will seem almost dull and lose all the meaning it has for us. So these are people we know who are maybe dour and negative, who try to excitedly share something, they kind of quickly dismiss it, and they diminish our enthusiasm, our excitement. They kind of rob us of the sparkle of what we wanted to share with them. But of course, this can go the other way as well. He says that if you are lucky, you know at least one person with whom it is the other way around. If you tell that person something exciting, it becomes more exciting. A great story will expand. You will find yourself telling it in more detail, finding the richness in all the elements more than when you thought about it alone. We co-construct an expanded and enlarged experience, in other words, when we share certain meaningful experiences with trusted others who share our enthusiasm. And the point is that chatbots may potentially have this kind of role for some people. They may fill this role in the conversational practices that they help us to maintain, that preserve this continuing connection with the dead. So our conversational habits provide structure and order to our days. They help us discover new meaning and ways of relating to the world and experiencing it, as the Gendland quote shows us. So for example, when I come home from work at night, let's say that partner asks me about my day, pours a glass of wine, asks me about my day. They're not just asking for a litany of facts, just to literally run through factually what I did that day. They want to share my experience of the things that happened to me, the things I did. They can expand my interpretation and how I relate to the experiences I had that day. And the idea here is that by affording, conversational practices, chatbots might help us reconstruct aspects of the habitual worlds that we shared with those who have died. We can enact some of these conversational habits throughout our day with the person we've lost, a digital representation of the person we've lost. This is because chatbots are designed to respond in the voice and the style of a trusted partner, again, the person who's close to us. And this familiarity brings a sense of ease, of intimacy and connectedness. And here's a quote from one individual who describes conversing with Mazurenko's chatbot. This individual says, what really struck me is that the phrases he speaks are really his. You can tell that that's the way he would say it. Even short answers to, hey, what's up? He had this really specific style of texting. So there's something very intimate, personal, and familiar in the style of these chatbots that, again, are programmed precisely to replicate the style of the person who is dead. There's a kind of intimacy and ease of conversational practices that can give us a sense of reconstructing a part of a habitual world that we used to have with this person that's now been lost in their absence. Now, these conversational practices have a couple of different functions. They can have an epistemic significance. So Roman's bot has an advice menu option. One friend reports using it to learn things about himself and Roman. He says that in using this chatbot, I can ask questions of this chatbot. These are questions I never asked him. But when I asked for advice, I realized, again, he's talking to the chatbot, this person now, I realized that he was giving some pretty wise life advice. And that actually helps you get to learn the person deeper than you used to know them. So there's a kind of epistemic function that chatbots might fulfill. But chatbots also can play an important emotion regulative function as well. There's also an affective significance to our conversational habits. Again, the point is not just to convey information. The point is also to share experiences and to expand our affective repertoire when we talk about our day or our experiences with other people. And since chatbots provide real-time feedback, they can provide real-time emotion regulative significance. They can tell a joke, offer an opinion, provide encouragement, etc. And again, the familiar rhythm, the style, the tone of the text shapes this synchronic sense of felt presence, that the individual, the dead is present in some moment-to-moment way, helping to engage with our emotions and regulate them. And this is consistent with how many users of Roman's chatbot report using it in an emotional therapeutic way. So for example, venting about work or relationship problems, using this chatbot to find a kind of emotional solace. But chatbots may provide a kind of longer-term diachronic emotional resilience too. This is because even just the felt potential for reconstructing habits of intimacy, just knowing that this chatbot and the possibilities it affords are there, can be a way of maintaining a continuing bond with the dead. There's some interesting empirical work that backs this up. So there's a couple of studies that show that individuals who've lost somebody, they've had a loved one die, know that they can return, knowing that they can return to the dead person's Facebook page whenever they like, instead of just having to go to a grave site or something like that. Knowing this person's Facebook page is there generates a more robust sense of continuing bonds with the dead person than just engaging in offline rituals, again, like going to a grave site or something to that effect. And this is especially the case for digital natives, people who've grown up with social media and technologies. And of course, chatbots are much richer than a static Facebook page. So the idea would be that then there's a kind of richer, deeper sense of diachronic resilience that might emerge through having this sense of felt possibility that attaches to these chatbots. Let me turn to the third dimension. Again, this is just kind of a sketch. Now, we talk about all of these dimensions in more detail in the paper. The third dimension of habits of intimacy concerns sharing time. So let me give you a really beautiful quote from the poet and philosopher Denise Riley. So she unexpectedly lost her adult son, who died suddenly on a holiday of an undiagnosed heart condition. And Riley talks about the experience of suddenly time stopping for her. Time, her entire relationship with time was distorted. The future possibilities, all of that is distorted in the experience of suddenly losing her son. She says that his sudden death dropped like a guillotine blade to slice right through my old expectations that my days would stream onwards into my coming life. No plans can be entertained, although you keep up an outward show of doing so. So she's performing being in time, thinking about the future with friends and colleagues, even though she has no lived experience of inhabiting time. This experience, she says, is not captured by the familiar and threadbare remark that time stopped. It's more complicated than that, she says. As you read her description, this is again a very beautiful book that I can't recommend highly enough. Riley knows that time has not actually stopped, even though she feels a deep dissociation from the future, closing down of future possibilities and projects. This is her lived time stopped the moment of her son's death, even though she knows intellectually that time moves forward without her son. But the point is that inhabiting this stopped time, she says, offers a kind of solace, a form of care that she says will not give up its affectionate task. So inhabiting this kind of stopped time with her son, this stopped time, this pocket of stopped time, embedded in the flowing of time that everyone else, forward-looking flowing of time that others share, this inhabiting this pocket of the timeless present, stopped time, allows her to maintain a continuing bond with her son in the moment of his death, even as the rest of the world moves on. She says that inhabiting time this way involves living inside two lives. You're fused with the dead as if to animate them. And what we suggest in the paper is that chatbots furnish resources for creating and inhabiting a pocket of the timeless past embedded within the onflow of the present. This is a kind of interactive space that goes beyond just memory. There's something more richer and interactive and dynamic about it. Inhabiting this pocket of the timeless past with chatbots allows us to recalibrate our relationship with the dead in real time and learn to renegotiate the world without their physical presence. Okay, so again, a lot more we could say about that, but the point is just that in this way, chatbots may provide for some useful resources to help navigate the emotional complexities, the loss of meaning that arises from the felt absence of the person who has died, as well as to help us reconstruct our habitual relationship to a world that now exists without them. They can provide useful resources for reconstructing habits of intimacy and continuing bonds that help us to explore and construct new ways of relating to the absence of the person we've lost. Okay, so that's kind of an attempt to give something of a positive sketch of the role that chatbots might play. In the remaining now time that I have, I want to turn to some worries. So Lucy and I are not immune to the fact that there are some legitimate concerns people might have about this technology and about using chatbots this way. And so we consider some of these worries in the paper. The first thing I want to discuss is something called the ick factor. So if you're like me, when you first heard about this technology, you probably had a kind of ick response. Now, ooh, this feels gross somehow. Something feels a bit wrong. It feels a bit exploitive. It just feels a bit icky. I'm not comfortable with this. I think that's a common response. And it's a common response that even people involved in these projects have. So individuals at Microsoft who are involved in this technology actually say that. So Tim O'Brien, in response to a tweet where an individual cited this technology, how Microsoft patenting chatbots to revive dead loved ones, referenced the Black Mirror episode that I referenced earlier. And someone involved actually in Microsoft in this project says, I'm looking into this. The application date from April 27th predates the AI ethics reviews we do today. I sit on the panel, he says, and I'm not aware of any plan to build or ship it. And yes, it's disturbing. So I think that last bit especially captures the fact that many of us have intuitively and immediately this kind of ick factor, that something is wrong about this. And we can flesh out, I think, some of the philosophical dimensions of this ick factor by turning to the work, some recent work, some good work that Patrick Stokes and Adam Boobin have done on this. And we characterize or class some of these concerns, these philosophical concerns around this ick factor under what we call replacement worries. So the concern very simply is the following. When we use chatbots to engage with the dead, to construct continuing bonds, habits of intimacy, etc., we move from just recollecting the dead, kind of honoring them in their memory, to trying to replace them. And Stokes gives us two reasons. I love this picture. He's green on green background. I think it's one of the best profile pictures out there. So Stokes gives us two reasons why we should be worried about replacement. First, in replacing the dead with chatbots, if that's what we're doing, we treat the dead as a resource. We adopt a kind of instrumental relationship to them. And I'll unpack this in a little bit. And then secondly, we potentially do injustice to them because we're treating the living, not just the dead, but the living as replaceable. Here's how he puts this idea. He says that to replace the irreplaceable is to concede that it was, in fact, never irreplaceable at all. It implies that you don't love this person, but whoever or whatever turns up to fulfill certain roles they play in your life. So individuals that we share our lives with are no longer valued, according to this worry, for their singularity. They're simply valued in virtue of the functional role they play in our lives. And if my partner dies, or my mother dies, or my father, or whatever, I can just replace them with somebody else or some other thing, because all I care about is maintaining this functional role, not the singularity of the individual itself. So again, there are two reasons, just to sum up again, and I'll unpack these in more detail in a second. Replacement worries think we treat the dead as a resource, and we instrumentalize them, and we also do justice to the living. We treat the living as replaceable too. We reduce them to kind of functional roles they play in our lives, which fails to respect their singularity as persons. Stokes gives us even another worry. He says that another worry is that what might start out as a practice of remembrance or recollection could easily slide into replacement. So maybe we start with good intentions. We think we want to start using these chatbots as a way of honoring the memory of the person we've lost, but it quickly slides into something different, into a practice of replacement. And in using technology to enhance our recollection of the dead, we may end up, in effect, forgetting that they are dead, he says. In other words, in using chatbots, we aren't really creating continuing bonds with the dead that preserve the knowledge that they're dead. We're instead using them to pretend that they haven't died at all. At least a possibility, he says. Okay. So I think these are all really good worries. I think Lucy and I take these seriously. And to be very clear, we're not unabashed evangelists of this technology. We want to take these worries seriously, but I think we're not entirely convinced that they are successful, or nor do we think they reflect how, at least based upon the evidence we have so far, that people actually want to use and engage with chatbots within grief work. So as we've seen, using chatbots isn't always, or even primarily, about remembering someone. We're not trying to scaffold our past memories of that person. I think that gets the nature of what we look for from chatbots wrong. Instead, when we look at the narratives of people who have actually engaged with chatbots, we look at what they do with them, we find that they actually furnish opportunities for habits of intimacy. Again, chatbots are often said to be important resources for talking about current days, plans, just talking to the individual about how we miss them, how we understand they're gone. And we're working through the sadness we feel over their loss via this technology. And the point is that the dead are brought into the present with us via these habits. They're addressed as though they can hear what's being said, that what is being said to them means something and even matters to them, even though we know they're dead, even though we acknowledge in the way we interact with them that they are dead. And the question is, in using chatbots, are we or would we really be striving to replace the person who has died? I think, again, I'm not sure this worry quite gets how we use chatbots correctly. Recollection and replacement are not the only ways we might engage with the dead. So I think one of the arguments we make in the paper is that Stokes seemed to set up a kind of false binary here, that it's either all recollection or all replacement. But we've just seen that people use chatbots, and I'll turn back to this in a minute, provide some more quotes to support this, that people use chatbots in a more subtle, sophisticated way. There are two reasons we might want to resist this replacement narrative. So there's a practical reason. Chatbots only provide a kind of thin reciprocity, we might refer to it, not the thick reciprocity of persons. While we can share with chatbots, they can't robustly share with us. This is a kind of asymmetrically shared world. Our world, the world of the living, continues with surprises, interactions, difficulties, joys, etc., that happen outside of our interaction with the chatbot. And of course, a chatbot has access to none of that. Their world only exists in relation to the person they are chatting with. And crucially, this is a key psychological point, we know this. When we engage with this technology, we experience the chatbot is lacking a full world they can share. This is part of the phenomenology of actually reaching out to engage with chatbots. And of course, within chatbots, at least in their current incarnation, there's also a loss of spontaneity, novelty, unexpectedness that persons have, as well as a lack of intercorporeality, kind of rich bodily exchange. It's at the heart of our engagement with individuals, with persons, intercorporeality and a kind of diminished interaffectivity. And the point is that we're more than just our conversational goods, as Elder calls it, that we provide others. When we engage with someone, we look for more than just the information they can share, more than just the things they can say and speak to us. We want a richer kind of relationship with them. And so we know, therefore, that some dimensions of this kind of bodily affective intercorporeality, interaffectivity are missing when we engage with chatbots. And there's a psychological reason why we might push back against some of this replacement narrative as well. We can ask, what kind of relationship do we look to construct with chatbots? What do we actually look to do with them? One thing we actually look to do when we look at the narratives of people who use them again, is to construct a kind of imaginal relationship with them. So here's Kate Norlock. She says that this is something we actually often do when we look for various ways to find and maintain connections with the dead, various practices, rituals, resources that help us maintain continuing bonds. Here's how she puts it. She says that perhaps many readers have had the experience of not just thinking about a dead friend or family member, but holding an inner dialogue or argument with the departed individual, or imagining their response to one's actions or beliefs, or maintain a practice previously shared with the deceased because it was shared with the deceased. So we still do things. We still make our coffee in the morning the way we used to when the person we've lost was with us. We sit down in the same place at our table to have breakfast. We sleep on the same side of the bed. We turn the light out at the same time because that used to be this person's preference. We maintain these rituals and practices that help us to remain connected with the dead. And the point is, these rituals and practices, these imaginal relations, are not about attempting to replace someone. This is this kind of scaffolding our connection with others, with the dead, externalizing our grief and our grief work this way by relying on the environment. This is a common process of creating an imaginal relationship with the person we've lost. It's part of the process of navigating continuing bonds. And technologies then become just part of this. Chatbots potentially can become part of constructing these imaginal relations. And then just another point, additionally, both recollection and replacement least the way Stokes sets them up, seem like potentially static or rigid ways of thinking about how we might use chatbots in grief. That again, it's either just to remember people or just to replace them. But this is not a static relationship. Chatbots can play a more dynamic role in grief work. Again, grief work isn't active. It's something that develops and changes over time. As we go through our process of grief, our relationship with the person who's died continues to change. And so too might our relationship with the chatbot. So initially we might lean more heavily on the chatbot. We might use it throughout our day for all sorts of things, both kind of epistemic and emotional. And then, as often happens, we kind of adjust to our grief. We learn to inhabit the world a bit more effectively without the person we've lost. The chatbot might recede to the background. Other aspects of grief work might become more important. And so this, again, the point is that we might change our relationship with the chatbot as we develop new habits, new relationships, build a new world without the person that we've lost, new habits of intimacy. I think this idea is borne out by looking at a few cases where this technology exists and how people describe using chatbots. So in these cases, when people talk about the role they played in their grief work, they emphasize that they use a chatbot to imagine that the other person is listening. They don't talk about replacing the individual or even necessarily recollecting them. It's just this imaginal relationship that the other person is listening. So here's a quote, a nice quote from this is Eugenia Krueger, who developed this technology, the Mazurenko's chatbot. She says that it turned out that the primary purpose of the bot had not been to talk, but to listen. All those messages were about love or telling him something they never had the time to tell him. So she's looked over thousands of messages that people have sent to his chatbot, even if it's with their consent, to be clear. Even if it's not a real person, there was a place where they could say it. They can say it when they feel lonely. She continues, lately, when she talks about him, they were very close, she's begun to feel a sense of peace about Mazurenko's death. In part, that's because she built a place where she can direct her grief, this chatbot. In a conversation we had this fall, she likened it to just sending a message to heaven. For me, it's more about sending a message in a bottle than getting one in return. So again, it's about just having this imaginal connection to this resource that allows us to pretend they're listening, to feel as though they're present with us and sharing this time and space, even though we know they're not. The point is, just kind of sum up, and then I'm gonna be done. There are clearly ways that chatbots are limited to a kind of thin reciprocity. They lack the thick reciprocity that we get when we interact with embodied subjects. But maybe that's all we want. That's all we look for in this kind of technology as a transitional object of grief. This thin reciprocity makes chatbots well suited for scaffolding an imaginal relationship with the dead, and also encourages our construction of continuing bonds precisely because they are not a perfect replica. The fact that they are not the person, that they are not a perfect representation of the individual we've lost, forces us to adjust, recalibrate, and change our relationship to the dead as we reintegrate with the world of the living. And our motivation to use them, and this seems borne out at least so far in the testimonies and narratives we have of people who do, may primarily be about easing into and eradicating our loss, not hiding from it or pretending that it didn't happen. I think it's telling that at the end of this Black Mirror episode, the robot Ash ends up in the attic. Martha doesn't want to live with him, precisely because it's not Ash. Okay, final slide. So to sum up, we argue in this paper that whatever well-founded reservations we may have about this technology, it's only going to become more sophisticated, more prevalent. And I think a key kind of practical takeaway of this paper, we hope, is that it shows that this technology, chatbots, may have a therapeutic value that will get lost if we talk about this technology in stark or exaggerated terms, such as some of these overblown replacement worries, which touch on something important, but we think are just a bit too kind of coarse-grained and crude at this point to really be persuasive. And it's important to remember that we've always developed technologies for maintaining continuing bonds with the dead. Chatbots are just continuous with this practice. This is how we grieve as human beings. And existing cases do seem to be used as a grieving practice, as a way of maintaining continuing bonds while acknowledging the loss that we've experienced, and not as a full replacement for the dead. That's it. Thanks very much.